Well, we also, as we said, mentioned that if you want to ask questions for the Senate President or House Speaker, you can always scan this QR code located at the bottom of your screen, and we will continue to track in the comments as they come in throughout the show.
You know, one of the things the governor had said that green fee dollar could help pay for is this insurance issue that we are facing. I know that you proposed legislation that did not make it through, but let's talk a little bit about that. The governor saying that he could even call a special session to address the insurance costs that are really ballooning for folks, particularly in condos, but really starting to ripple throughout. Do you agree with the idea of perhaps calling a special session? And tell us a little bit about what you proposed and why you think it didn't make it.
Yeah, so the governor is considering a special session, but in the meantime, I believe he will form a working group to assess what's happening over this summer. So we should kind of play that out first. Although, we know, the Senate president knows as well, because last time we were here, we mentioned property insurance, and we know that this is a growing problem that is going beyond condo buildings. It is now impacting wooden townhomes. And, basically what's happening is this is the effect of climate change and the natural disasters that result from climate change. It is not just happening in Hawaii. This is happening throughout the United States. And in fact, it probably began in the other states before it really reached Hawaii. But what we're seeing now is, especially in condominium buildings, is condos that are not fully insured when it comes to property insurance. They're hurricane insurance. And there's a couple of reasons why insurance is increasing. It's because of hurricane risk, natural disaster risk, water pipes, especially water pipes in condo buildings. So this is having an exponential impact, coupled with one or two insurers that are either not renewing policies or limiting the amount of coverage under their policies. So, we've been working on this for the past 4 months during the legislative session, and we did have a proposal to provide seed money, a loan, to two existing state funds that do provide property insurance, the Hurricane Relief Fund and the Hawaii Property Insurance Association. And the intent was to provide seed money so that these two funds, these two entities, could go out and purchase reinsurance, and then make that reinsurance available to condo buildings or other kinds of residences that are underinsured. The bill unfortunately did die in the last days of the session, but it was meant to provide stopgap temporary coverage insurance coverage for underinsured buildings.
Senate President, do you think that this is an issue that warrants a special session, that it is that severe or important of a topic where you're going to have to call lawmakers back to session?
I think that we are open to the idea. We need to take an assessment of, how bad the problem is, and then is there a plan between the governor, the House, and the Senate that we could agree on that would fix the problem if we came back? At the time that the bill was going through the legislature this past session, if you look at the drafts, essentially, as the speaker indicated, it was a stopgap or stepping in to fill a void, but there was recognition that you could not sell anything from the state that was less than what was being provided for in the private marketplace. If, in fact, the expectation is the state will be able to come in and fund a plan that will go under what is currently being charged in the market, then the liability that the state would undertake as self-insuring would be a significant number, and the amount of money that we would have to raise would make that $5 billion tax relief plan by 2030 seem like pocket change.
What is your concern? I mean, do you think that there is a way out of this given the enormous costs that you're referencing?
Well, there is no way out of this to be much cheaper because the hazard risks are expensive. I think that, the expectation that the special session would come in and result in a lower premium may be giving false hope out to the people here. How can we stabilize it? how can we find a financially sustainable plan that works for the state government as well as the homeowners? And how do you keep in the private insurers? Otherwise, people may be left to go to, I forget the legal term, but these secondary or outside, like Lloyd's of London, where I'm told you could see 25 or 50x of premiums on how they insure the uninsurable items. I just remember athletes like going into their senior year of college as big prospects would buy these policies. So if they got injured,